hope everyone had a great lunch. Before we jump into the discussion with our panelists here, wanted to share a couple of things. We did get a question about, will we be sharing the slides? Yes, we will probably post them in the next day or two, so you can keep an eye on the landing page. We got a question around, can we have a working group or a learning circle around street outreach? Yes, we can probably do that, so happy to try to figure out how to integrate that. And I wanted to share that's exactly the type of information that we want from all of you today. I heard through the grapevine that somebody said, is it true that you really haven't put together the curriculum yet? And the answer is, it is true. We haven't, because we really want to hear from all of you about what you want to dive into, what your needs are, what you want to learn from each other. So we are really taking that to heart. So we really want your feedback throughout the day. We want your feedback on the evaluation at the end of the day. So just want to make sure to put that out there and say, genuinely, we have not put together the curriculum yet. We have lots of ideas for it, but we're waiting to make sure that we hear from all of you. So we're going to jump right into the discussion with our funders. We have some great panelists today that we are super, super excited about. I'm going to share a little bit of background with you. Can you give me the clicker? Thank you. Just so you know who we've got here today with us. So we have Mabel Alvarez. She serves as the Director of Investor Relations and Impact Investment Services at the Nonprofit Finance Fund, where she builds and manages partnerships with mission-driven investors that are dedicated to advancing the community wealth and well-being. In her role, she also oversees the development and management of community-centered funds, working alongside nonprofit and philanthropic partners to help move financial resources where they can make the greatest impact. She brings over a decade of experience in social impact work, including her time at EL Education, where she led multi-year strategic initiatives supporting school districts across the country. If there's anything else you want to share, I'm going to let you do that when you give some remarks, because I want to be able to dive into the conversation. We also have Kelly Forsbauer. She has spent the majority of her career in funder organizations, focusing on programs within housing and homelessness systems. After graduating from the University of Memphis with a master's degree in social work, Kelly worked in the nonprofit space focused on continuum of care funded programs in Tennessee. Later moving to manage state and federal ESG funding at the state of Colorado in the Division of Housing. So some of her friends who were back there earlier. And currently she works at in the philanthropic space as a grants manager with the Colorado Trust, which is a health equity fund. Kelly is passionate about systems level work and building capacity for nonprofits to help create positive, lasting growth for communities. And then finally, but not least, we've got Sarah Needleman, who is the managing director of Harlech Consulting, where she specializes in youth programs, philanthropy, grant writing, and organizational strategy. Based in Denver, Colorado, she brings over 15 years of experience in systems change, advocacy, and program management focused on youth well-being and human trafficking prevention. Previously, Sarah served as the manager of youth success at Gary Community Ventures, where she advanced youth well-being through systems change and managed $1.2 million in grants to the community and government organizations. She also had the role of program officer at the Anschutz Family Foundation, reviewing over 200 proposals annually and managing relationships with over 300 organizations across Colorado. So join me in giving them a warm welcome. Thank you all for being here. So I want to start off, I think, probably with the biggest question that everybody has, which is, what are you seeing and experiencing in the funding landscape? And if it's specific to homelessness and housing, let's talk about that. But if broadly you're seeing big changes, given the uncertain times, I think maybe it was Mabel who said to me earlier, you know, we don't know what's going to happen by 3 p.m. every day. Like, what's the latest update going to be? Yeah, tell us what you're seeing and experiencing. And feel free to share a little bit more about yourself if you want in your comments.
I'm better than this microphone. Okay.
it's true. We are in uncertain times where, can you all hear me now?
There you go.
Okay, great. So yes, it's true. We are in uncertain times where we are seeing things being frozen and things as in certain government funding, whether it's your state or your local or federal, being frozen, or certain cuts are happening, and simultaneously philanthropic investments are also being held a little closer, and some grants that you normally might have gotten this year or depending on next year, you're not seeing that anymore. And we're also seeing that banks are being a little stricter. We're seeing that costs are going up. All these things we're seeing, and we're not just seeing it, we are also feeling it. And I sit Nonprofit Finance Fund. We are a CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution. And as a CDFI, community-centered, we come in and we try to fill that gap. The services that we provide is a lending service or financing services. We also have a consulting arm. But in the midst of all this uncertain times, a lot that's happening that you may not see is that there are active conversations happening, active conversations amongst CDFI partners of what can we do, what do they need. Same thing, us speaking with our philanthropic investors. So, we are the investors basically the clients of these foundations, where we're speaking with them and they're asking us, where can we help? We don't want to just take everything and because of fear, because that's not the truth. They're trying to figure out what is helpful, not put something out there that you all do not need, but these are active conversations and strategic conversations happening so that we can continue to support the communities that we're serving.
Thank you.
Just pass it.
Hard to follow Mabel, because that was great. I think a lot of the stuff that we're seeing, especially at the Colorado Trust, is similarly philanthropic partners that are trying to come together to talk about how to strategically approach some of these issues and how to pool funding and just looking at what is the landscape. I think right now there's a lot of conversations around different tax bill things around taxing endowments and how does that affect philanthropic funding if there's the different mindsets around spend down or existing in perpetuity, support communities from a more stable or strategic kind of long-term commitments. And I think that's one that's really kind of rocking the space a little bit in philanthropy of how are we approaching how to be able to use our investments and our endowments to be able to fund projects and continue projects long term, and also how to navigate the space of these times are also unprecedented and calling for a lot of action and a lot of stepping up, and how do we balance that out? And especially, funders have different risk levels and funders have different ideas of how to do things. And so I think it's really exciting to see the conversations happening. I am hopeful that we can continue to push and keep these conversations going and be able to rise to the things that are happening. And also I think that's, as Mabel said, things are changing every day. And I think there's a lot of that, trying to be strategic while also having to continually kind of pivot, which I know is not something that's a new idea or something that this entire room is not facing as well. So.
I have recently left the philanthropic space, so it's been really interesting being back in sort of working with nonprofit and government funding. And I think one of the things is everyone in Funderland is looking for diversified streams of funding, right? And you've all heard this, and sustainability, right? And how do you do that? And that is something you've been hearing for 10 years. This isn't new, but it's a little scarier now when people aren't opening their pocketbooks in the same way that they were because of a lot of fears that are out there. One of the things that I have been seeing is more collaborative funding proposals that are more successful and that are actually being pitched cold to certain foundations, which seems like not always the thing to do, but every funder's website has some connect with us. And if you're doing something really cool, you should probably just write what the cool thing you're doing, especially if it's across many agencies, it's with government, with people with lived experience, however you're doing the work. There are places that are more open to those conversations. I would also say, particularly for folks in rural areas and frontier areas, talk to your community foundations. Those relationships can be awesome or they can be fraught, but honestly, your community foundation folks have a really good pulse on what else is happening in connectivity around certain grants, not just that they're giving, but that other folks might be. I think we often leave community foundations out of the discussion because they're smaller dollar, but actually those are the folks that are really knowing what the hyper-local situation is and can even maybe help think about other ideas for collaborative funding models or other funding that they may have heard about in their world.
Thank you. Can I ask all of you, just given your experience, what's some of the most innovative funding models or approaches that you've seen that would be, something for this group to be thinking about, maybe exploring a little bit more? What does that creatively look like in the funding world?
So, as Sarah was mentioning, there are a lot of collaborative ideas. One of the things that we do at NFF is that we manage different funds. We have one here called the Metro Denver Nonprofit Loan Fund, where different Colorado-based foundations came together, also alongside the city and county of Denver, to support nonprofits and developers that are in need. But one of the funds that we have that solely focuses on housing is our accelerated permanent supportive housing program that we have in California, servicing the county of LA. And with that, is basically one of the most beautiful or ideal situation where we see that the county made a commitment to reduce homelessness across the county. And with that commitment also came investment. And then the philanthropic partners came in. It's beautiful to see when we have philanthropy and we have government working hand in hand. And within that, there's always some sort of gap. And that's where we came in, right? As a gap filler, where we were seeing that the main audience, it was supportive housing developers. And these developers, although they were waiting and receiving support from the county, support from philanthropic partners, the area that was not funded was the pre-development. So when it comes to pre-development or the early on stage financial supports that they need, that's where we came in. So we created this fund to support the pre-development aspect of the overall construction project, because everything in a sense is a domino effect. Once you don't have the funding or the capital to cover the pre-development, then everything else gets delayed, right? The acquisition gets delayed, the construction gets delayed. And the more that you wait to launch that project, the cost changes. The cost that was last month may not be the cost this month. So they need the early on stage flexible capital to move it forward. And so that's a fund that we have in California, where we're able to partner with government, we're able to partner with the philanthropic partners, and we're able to go in to be able to support that the full aspect of the project comes to life, so that we have community members that are suffering from homelessness are able to have the housing that they need. So that's a funding model for us.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that some of the recent programs that were funded through the trust, we also looked at models that use intersections, and similarly to what Sarah and Mabel have already said, a lot of the collaborative approaches, even if it's one agency applying, if there's also documented partnerships of how they're resourcing other entities and other organizations in their community. I think it's fair to say that very rarely can one organization meet the needs of every single client who may appear. And so being able to also see those established partnerships, not only are they such exciting models and to be able to see, but also shows the sustainability and the community input. And I think especially for funders in times where there is a lot of fear and other considerations around funding, I think that's something that showing that there's those collaborative partnerships, there's those established relationships that within community is a really good way to help show and build trust, I think, especially with funders, especially if it's a new to, if you are a new organization to a funder. I think that's something that can be such a great way to leverage that and really highlight that in your applications or cold pitches. I love that too, of just being hey, this is something really cool that we're doing and innovative, and even if there's not an open funding, it never hurts to also reach out. And like there, a lot of time philanthropic entities also have discretionary funds, or I think also especially just, there's a lot of need. And I think continually seeing that need and hearing that from community also helps to influence board and leadership and things like that and how we structure programs that we fund. But I think, especially like the collaborative approach is like such a big one. And I think also being able to see like new methods of programming that is also proven to be effective, like not in my current role, but in previous roles, I remember, we funded organizations that were doing like street outreach to rapid rehousing directly. And like some of those programs where it's like street outreach is so needed. Rapid rehousing is a really awesome, really needed program. And being able to do some innovative approaches to be able to see how we can kind of take different projects that may kind of be seen as separate programs and also combine them, I think is something that also helps show innovation, especially for organizations that, have been doing the work for a long time, and you have proven track records and you have the data to show that the work is happening. And then that's also an opportunity to be able to showcase like new types of programming or new things that you're expanding in your current work too.
So I think there's a couple of ways this is such a hard question, because I think it's hard when you're all thinking about ways to solve things, and then you have to think about how does your work fit into funding land, and that's its own level of fun. But I will say a couple of things that strike me is one, the like pilot to scale model. And that can be a small pilot, but sometimes just getting money out the door for a small pilot can then show proof of concept for a bigger fund, and also develop earlier partnerships with funders if they're open to sort of pilot funding, which is always, again, a problem. A lot of funders are like, oh, if you don't have 3 to 5 years of data, don't darken our doorstep or whatever. But like there are funders who are more interested in pilot to scale type funding. I will say one of the things that was fun that I worked on when I was at Gary was we had a youth-to-youth peer support cohort. And cohort models are really great, but I think one area of funding that's sort of emerging is around not just recovery peer support, but general peer support, having folks with lived experience get the training and young people to support other folks. Mental Health America is doing a bunch of work around and Colorado got sort of in it with policy, but not quite there, around funding. And again, Medicaid, let's hope it's here. So I'm saying this is like, oh, isn't this a great opportunity? But with Medicaid, having Medicaid in Colorado and the new BASOs and RAIs pay for peer-to-peer funding that isn't necessarily only recovery based, but is supportive based as well. So there's things like that also include policy changes. And I know the state's having its own funding issues, but it's something also to consider within the realm of 501c3s around the advocacy piece, in as much as you can. What does that look like as well? Or considering things like hiring, and everyone's going to be like, oh, lobbyists, but lobbyists, right? A shared lobbyist for the work, especially in rural. A lot of the voices don't get heard as much because the funding isn't there, but that's another thing to potentially talk to community foundations about. So it's adding that lens of policy, new things that are happening that you can get paid for in different ways, and really thinking too, like a lot of times we look just at the same funders in Colorado over and over and over again. And there are funders nationally that are interested in the work Colorado is doing, and especially in the housing and homelessness spaces. So don't be afraid to like skip a level and go national, because there's folks out there. This sounds so like, go Colorado, but we really do a lot of amazing stuff here because we have such a variety of urban, rural, frontier, we have all the things to prove that Colorado can do the work. And so how do we come together in these spaces to really find ways to have our voices be louder about Colorado on a national stage as well? And I know that's the long game, but it's also something that this kind of opportunity speaks to.
Awesome, thank you. I have a follow-up question, but before we go there, I just want to remind people, use the QR code in your folders if you want to submit questions. I am watching in real time, so we can try to integrate some of those questions throughout the conversation. But I wanted to follow up just in terms of peers and people with lived experience. You know, we talked earlier this morning around how important those kinds of intentional inputs are, right? And how do you meaningfully engage people with lived experience? And I'm curious from a funder's point of view, like as a funder, what do you all look for, you know, in terms of people with lived experience? And have you seen programs that have done amazing jobs in integrating meaningfully people with lived experience into the work, and what really stood out for you? I know that's a lot.
Lived experience is in a sense central.
Yep, you can just pull it up.
All right.
There you go.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. Lived experience. So at NFF, one of the things that we focus on is that any organization that we partner with, any developer that we partner with, that they are community centered and that they're focused on the community, not necessarily an outsider coming in, because one thing that is big is trust. When you do not have trust from those that are trying to serve you, it's really, really hard to be able to engage with the people that you're servicing. And one of our models that we have around community ownership is being able to invest. It's kind of like a with the people, for the people, by the people, where they are the ones that are daily active in the community. They're from the community, they know the community, they know the people that they're speaking with, and vice versa. So in this community ownership model that we have, we partner with them so that they are able to acquire the property to then service the community that they're in. For example, one of the programs is our Beacon program, where we're working alongside different developers, and we actually launched this in New Jersey, where these developers are acquiring property in the community that they're living in. And then the goal is to have community members in there so that they can be owners of their own assets and have ownership and a stake in the game in the community. But for us to have success, for us to even enter the door, for us to even be able to have a meaningful conversation, being part and knowing exactly what's happening or what they've been through is crucial. So we always focus on that aspect. One of the organizations that we invested in, Sierra House, even speaking with their staff, we went to visit them one time, and speaking with their staff member, the CEO is from the community that she's serving, born and raised and serving that community. Her staff is as well. So when they speak to it, they speak of it from a different level of passion. And that's something that we want to see, that we love to see. So when we're thinking about, is this client going to really make an impact? Are they truly there for the community? Because we're tracking outcomes. We want to see that whatever it is that you are requesting, whatever it is that you're saying that you're going to do, that you're actually going to do it, and it's there for the long haul. It's not something that's there temporarily. And I understand that there's fluctuations in the cycle of funding, I get that. But when we partner with them, we want to partner with them from a personal space because we care about overall community wealth and well-being.
Awesome. Yeah, so at the Trust, I think that we had a new strategic plan recently and then launched a lot of initiatives all at once. And their community voice is something that we incorporated into developing our strategic plan. And I think, you know, from a lived experience, like part of our like development of programs, I think is something we're still growing in. I think it's something that we also look to the organizations that we're funding to have lived experience and have like be integral into the community, because I think, you know, like a lot of funders, like we're not the experts, especially on communities. And so we look to those organizations that have those established relationships and that have lived experience incorporated into their program models. And I'm hoping that that's something too that will continue to grow in, of like how we also look at having lived experience and like more direct community impact or community voice, like as part of our program developments and things like that. In my role at the state previously, we did have a lived experience advisory group that was created specifically for our ESG, Emergency Solution Grant Program, that I worked on. And that was really awesome to be able to see how funders can also establish those lived experience groups and be able to inform how like we are writing things in our like grant proposals and how or our funding proposals and how we were actually structuring our applications and things like that. I think it's always one where when you're working with state and federal funding, especially the federal funding, there's a lot of regulations and things that are passed down for how you have to administer programs, but there is still flexibility to be able to incorporate those lived experience and those community voices into things. And so I think that was something that was really amazing to be able to see that when you have that investment in establishing groups, it helps structure how funders also are looking at the programs that they want to fund, and also how we're actually like asking for questions or how we're asking for information and what is and isn't important, and what are the type of program models that people have found to be really effective and things like that. And so definitely looking to others to like provide some of that information and be those experts that help us inform how we fund and how we do our work too.
So folks with lived experience, especially those who are experiencing any number of life events, is complicated and necessary. And one of the things that in past, I've been in the youth space for a while, so you'll have to excuse my like youth focus of this, but when we were bringing youth into some of our work groups, we didn't just train the youth because they've heard it, they've dealt with adults, right? But there's also like a clear, here's what we need from you. Here's our goal for having you in this group, right? And then here's compensation, bonus. And then, and honestly, people should be paid for their experience. We all know this. And I will say, as a funder, write that into your grants. Write in people with lived experience and community experts into your grants. It's worth it and feels less extractive. And then the other thing is a lot of grants say they want people with lived experience, and it can feel, especially when you're in direct care, that and like in the streets, like, oh, hey, do you mind talking to these funders or on this panel or whatever is going to be a lot. And there's ways to get around this, and we can talk about storytelling later, but how storytelling happens and how you can get those stories without it being sort of putting people up, say like, oh, look at the people who have experienced homelessness, right? Like there's other ways to do this that gets voices out. And I will say the thing that made the biggest difference though was having training for the room of adults and funders on how to work with community folks. So we had a whole training on Hart's Ladder of Youth Engagement, which is pretty amazing if you haven't used it. And like, where does your organization fall on Hart's Ladder, for example? So like preparing both the room and the folks entering the room to be receptive and to have a purpose and meaning is super important. I'm speaking to the choir here, I realize this, but I think it's also how you explain that in your grants is gonna look pretty amazing, because you all know how to do this and engage folks with lived experience really beautifully. And again, it's how do you tell that story and the work you do without sort of saying like, this person does this. How do you start telling like this more broad narrative of this is an example person, but this isn't an actual person that you know what I mean? You could say like, this is an experience of one of our guests broadly. And that's your story. You don't have to say like, here X person did X, Y, Z and had these interventions, because that can, especially in small communities, be traced back to who the person is, right? So how do you create those stories, those composite stories, and use those stories as part of your funding application and tell your story? One of the things that, sorry, this is slightly off topic, but like when you are trying to talk about your services, ask the people in your life and your community about the work you're doing, because a lot of times you'll hear back things that you didn't even sort of realize because you're in it every day. And I used to talk to my brother about what I was doing at Gary, and he'd be like, oh, well, it sounds like you're doing this, this, and that. I'm like, you know what? I am. That's amazing. Thank you. But that's a thing you can also use for your grant writing, and part of your storytelling is what are people saying back to you that you may not be seeing every day. So sorry, slightly off topic, Summer. Sorry.
No, I think it's helpful, and I think it's also, I think that training is really important because, like you said, we all know about the work that we're doing and how to work with people with lived experience. I've seen numerous times where board members do not do that. So I think really thinking about the training for your board members so that they understand how to be respectful, engaging, not offensive, can be really helpful too. So definitely would encourage that. I'm seeing a bunch of questions come in real time, so that is great. That's why I keep looking at my phone. One of the questions was, do you get one-on-one time with the panelists? Not today. But I will tell you, and I think this is a great example of something else to put in the evaluation at the end of the day, is to share kind of what you would like to see. We've been thinking about internally, do we do like a Shark Tank where you have an opportunity to make some pitches to funders and get some feedback? You know, if you want to have some one-on-one conversations, give us that feedback so we can continue to integrate that and be kind of creative in kind of helping you kind of get more comfortable in front of funders. Not everyone's comfortable. It has a power dynamic that can be really intimidating. I used to do that, you know, when I was a nonprofit executive director back in DC. I was terrified. And unfortunately, my first interaction with a funder, she scared the crap out of me. She just was not a friendly person at all. And it took me working with several more funders before I realized that not everybody was like that and to get more comfortable. So that's, you know, just something to put out there is understanding the power dynamic and getting you more comfortable in terms of speaking with funders is something, if you're interested in doing, we're happy to help with that. I also got a question, Sarah, to put you on the spot. Are there national funders interested in Colorado that you can name? And we got several questions on this. Be careful what you say.
Well, that's a lot of pressure. You know, I should really do my homework before. Yes, I will get that to Summer, and she will share that with you.
Yeah.
But I think another area, and just to keep an eye on this too, is the National Council on Nonprofits. They're an advocacy group, and they're sort of saying what's going on in the world, and also have suggestions for funders. But now I'm really embarrassed. I know they're out there, and now that you asked, I'm of course going completely blank on any national funders. But I'll find out, and we'll get back to you. I apologize.
The pressure is on. I do that all the time. Mabel, there was a question specifically for you around, is the Nonprofit Finance Fund a loan-only program? What other types of support do you all offer, if any?
I did want to touch quickly on the other question. I don't know, it wasn't for me, but at NFF, as a national CDFI, one of the things that takes us nationally is not just the local funders, but also the national funders. There are, Robert Wood Johnson's one of our national partners. So you might want to look up the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And there are several banks that have a foundation side to them. So look up the banks, the bigger ones that you know that they have their foundations and they work nationally. There's also the Hilton Foundation. Like there's a lot of these big names that they have a foundation side to them, and they work nationally, which allows us to go nationally. And to answer the question that was specific for me, so what we do is that we provide loans. So we do not provide grants. I know that's probably the basis behind that question, but we do not provide grants. But as a CDFI, and there are many CDFIs, there are local CDFIs, national CDFIs, what we do is that we provide flexible capital to different nonprofits and developers in a sense where, you will probably be turned away if you go to a bank. So what we do is that we step in, we can provide working capital for homeless service providers while you're waiting for government funding, these reimbursements, but it's delayed contracts, right? You were promised a date and you're still waiting to be repaid. In that gap that you're needing that working capital or that bridge loan to be able to sustain your operations for the next 3 months until you get reimbursed, that's where we step in and we support you during that transition period. So no, we do not provide grants, but we provide a plethora of flexible, affordable capital, and that's where we step in as a CDFI.
Awesome, thank you. And what you're talking about is, so you're talking about bridge granting, is that really, or is that separate?
So it's not a grant.
Yes,
It's a loan.
sorry.
It is a loan. Yes, it is a loan that we provide, and they're bridge loans or they're working capital loans. Working capital loans basically support your operation. So let's say for some of you that are waiting for funding from the state of Colorado or from the city, from your local city, whether that's the city and county of Denver or Aurora, and you're waiting for that grant to come in, but it didn't come in, and you still need to pay your staff. You still need to have your programs moving forward, and there's this gap. That's where you come to us, and that's where we will work with you and be able to provide you with that loan to allow you to continue that program or do what you need to in that moment. So that's also something that we did with our Metro Denver Nonprofit Loan Fund, where different foundations came together, and the majority of the loans or our clients in that portfolio received the bridge loan or received the working capital loan.
Thank you for clarifying. Is there a name for that fund specifically?
So we have bridge loans, we have mainly working capital loans through our normal operating, business, our normal business model. But in Colorado, we did the Metro Denver Nonprofit Loan Fund. That is the name, right? MDNLF, Metro Denver Nonprofit Loan Fund. It closed, and I say that it closed because it's still open in a sense that we are working with our clients. Actually, we have one of our clients here, which was great speaking with her. But we are not accepting any more applications. So this was actually a COVID response fund where the foundations in Colorado are saying, you know what, it's COVID. A lot of these organizations are at the brink of closing. They don't know what to do. How can we get together to help these organizations? And this is a lot that happens in a time of crisis, where they're just like right now having conversation of what can we do to support. So the Rose Community Foundation, the Denver Foundation, the Colorado Gives Foundations, these are all foundations that if you don't know of, they're great to have access to. And also the city and county of Denver came together to form a fund where we were able to provide bridge loans and working capital loans at zero interest to these organizations. From the lowest loan that I've seen was around $70,000 all the way to $250,000 loans. And we work with them on a repayment or schedule repayment plan, and we structure that loan with a term, and they're able to have this, again, it's zero interest, no collateral, and that's what was needed in that time. And that went from 2021 to 2023, where that fund was open, receiving application, and we have about 20 organizations across the state of Colorado, mainly the Metro Denver area, that received that funding.
One more question for you specifically. We did get a question around, can you talk a little bit about how CDFIs work?
Yes.
And before you do that, Tanya, did you want to grab a microphone? Okay.
So CDFIs and, Nonprofit Finance Fund, we specifically work with nonprofit and nonprofit developers or mission-driven developers. I say this because other CDFIs will work with small businesses. So each CDFI has more or less different goals, but at the end of the day, we are here to be that gap filler. So when we see, for example, NLA, where philanthropic partners or foundations are coming together with the city, but they're still waiting for that funding to come in. Let's say you want to acquire property for affordable housing, and you don't have that pre-development funding. You know you're going to get reimbursed by the county, but you don't have that yet. So that's where we'll come in to support. And a CDFI will come in to be that community support. And because in many situations, when you go to a bank and you don't have everything that checks off the box, many times a bank will say no. As we know, the banks are very strict. And so you'll come to us to be able to be a bit more flexible with you. Sometimes, we'll have a term with you where, it's a 2-year term or it's a 3-year term where we work with you or we provide you with certain capital. Our loan size is between 500,000 and 8 million. Every other CDFI is different. Some of them, their loan sizes are larger. Some of them, the loan sizes are smaller. We also work with other CDFIs as well to provide the necessary loans. Now, it can be a pre-development loan, construction, renovation, acquisition, working, bridge, lines of credit. So these are different things that you will be able to work with a CDFI on. And specifically at NFF, you have to be mission-driven, community-centered. We also focus a lot on low to moderate income communities. I want to say that for the most part, at least from what I've seen, that's very true amongst other CDFIs.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit because we
Summer,
had
Can I
yes.
do a quick follow-up on something Mabel said right
Yes,
quick?
yeah.
Mabel made a great point around foundations based from banks. Just like you have to fill out a 990 every year, or your accounting folks, so do foundations. If you go to Canva or ProPublica and look them up, one thing they have to do is list who they funded. So if you scroll to the back, there are literally 10, 20, 30 pages of organizations and how much they funded them in a calendar year. So if you scroll those lists and you don't see anybody from Colorado, or you don't see anybody who's in homelessness or assistance, move on, right? But you might find a list of someone who's funding something that you're already doing. They'd be the first place to start. And it's publicly available information, have to do it every year.
Tanya, can you repeat the names of those?
Canva, which used to be GuideStar, and ProPublica. ProPublica is a little bit easier to navigate. Canva has a little bit more detail. But between them, you can find, again, what every foundation, who they gave to, and how much in a calendar year.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask another question. It goes in a slightly different direction. We have an organization that has started doing Zoom-style presentations for grant applications. And they're saying it's incredible. It's so much more natural. Question is, how do we get more funders to think about this kind of thing? And can the funding landscape change to meet the needs of organizations where they are, and even things like grant applications, the ones that have been around for the past 30 years that we've seen time and time again. How can we help funders think about their work differently?
I think, first of all, love that idea. I also think that being able to just go for it, especially with reaching out to foundations or funders and stuff, I think is a big one. I think, a lot of times we have a lot of we call them unsolicited requests, but we have a lot of different requests that come to us. And I think that, being able to also have some of those conversations with, especially if you're funded, but in general, I think just putting it out there and being able to share that with funders, I think is always a great step. I think especially if you have some relation, if you are funded by an entity and you have relationships with the program officers or program managers, I think that is always a great place to start too, with being able to share some of that information that can be pushed up to leadership or board members that may not be always in those face-to-face spaces a lot. I think there's a lot of different approaches to philanthropy. I think some are much more trust-based and much more leaning towards okay, however we need to fund or whatever we need to do, we're going to do. And then there's still, different philanthropic models that are also more kind of traditional grant-making spaces. And I think especially if you have a relationship with funders and that they're trying to talk about being more trust-based or trying to push some of the funding that they want to do, I think being able to challenge them on applications and different systems is incredible. I know we've been trying to explore different ways of doing reporting, for instance, of instead of just being all right, type up this report and then send it to us, we've been trying to do more video calls, or someone could just send us a recording of I'm just going to talk about what our program has been doing and I'm going to send you the file, or doing interview style reporting and things like that. And so I think there is an appetite for being able to do a Zoom call style or have things like that. I think there's still a lot of traditional grant making that is not quite set up yet, I think, to be able to like do like, let's schedule Zoom calls. But I think there are other types of funding initiatives. And I think, again, getting that push for it and just like being able to communicate with funders. Because I think one thing continually learn is that like funders don't know everything. And I think that that's something where it's like, I think if someone presents an idea like that, people may be like, wow, we never thought about that. What an amazing idea. And so I think that's also some of it. And it's like, you know, as someone that's like, you know, on staff, I think that's things that we can share ideas of. But I think there's also there's a lot more weight behind it when it comes from organizations that are in communities that we're serving, because it's not just like, oh, here's an idea that we have internally that may be cool. It's like, this is what our community and organizations are asking for, and this is how we can help support them, and this is how we can change some of the narratives around what grant making can be. And so I think that's just one, is like, use the power. And I think Summer, I appreciate the discussion on like the power imbalance with philanthropy and stuff too. It's like, I used to write grants for organizations, or I remember working on federal funding and being like, oh my God, I have to meet with HUD. That's so terrifying. And then you meet someone and you're like, oh, you're just a person too, you know, like, and so I think like being able to also like take hold of the power that you all have too. And as an organization, like, you are doing the work, you know, so many of these like programs and like funding things way more than funders ever will. And we also want to be able to look towards partners that know what they're doing and can be able to like just tell us what you need too. And so I think having conversations, especially like a Zoom call or something like that, is such an awesome way to be able to establish those relationships, which I think a lot of funding, especially in philanthropy, is still based. It's a lot of relationship building. Like, there are competitive grants and competitive funding opportunities, but there's still a lot of that work that's done in like who knows who and how do you get connected with spaces. And I think having face-to-face time, especially for organizations that may be trying to become a little bit more trust-based or move in different spaces, is such a great way to help push leadership and boards and things like that to be able to like put a face to a name and be able to continue to do that work.
So I would say a couple other thoughts are, if you're connected with like the Community Resource Center, CRC, or you're connected with CNA, Colorado Nonprofit Association, CNDC, Colorado Nonprofit Development Center, Haudenosaunee Collective, there's a lot of different folks who are able to sort of get more collective voices around application and reporting changes. And everyone's going to moan when I say this, but the Colorado Common Grant application, which no one uses anymore, awesome. But when they did, that actually came out of nonprofits saying to funders, and through CNA and through CRC and all these different places, like, we are so tired of rewriting the same thing 3,000 times. Can we do the Colorado Common Grant application? So it happens. This can happen. Change can happen. And then it was translated into at least Spanish, which is something, based on the needs of the community. So there are avenues for change there as well. I think there's a lot of work to be done around language justice. I think there's a lot of work to be done around translation and interpretation. And, you know, we always are saying, oh, everyone has different learning styles. Well, everyone has different ways of communicating with funders, and those aren't always accepted. But like, if at these tables that you're at, if you have connections to sort of advocacy opportunities, this is a good place to say, you know, everyone in housing in this huge group of people really wants to do XYZ for applications. Those are things that you can say and will be more heard as a collective, in addition to individual relationships. So just something to consider there.
Great, thank you. Did you want to say something?
I'll be quick. I will try to be quick. I feel like as a CDFI, we sit in the middle, right? Because we're also grantees. We work with a lot of foundations that want to invest. So we are grantees, not just for our general operating, but to reinvest back into the community. And then we work with different nonprofits where they're not, you know, just getting a loan. Our consulting side, the majority of the clients are not our financing clients. They are receiving financial management training and receiving financial tools and resources, where they are a lot of the times the grantees of other foundations. And as Sarah and Kelly were saying, it is very important for you to tell your story and tell what you need. We had a funder come to us, which was my favorite line. It's not true for all funders, but it was one of my favorite lines in many conversations that I've had with different funders. We recognize that we are the purse. Please tell us what is needed because we don't know. And I'm like, the transparency in the room right now opens up for a beautiful conversation. And things like that, when we sit down with clients and we learn what they need, we then communicate it with them because the services that are being provided are not just through CDFIs, but they have their grantees that they work with directly. So by them knowing these things is very important for them. And then there's the realistic factor that they have a lot of grantees to sit down and do these videos. I just want to be realistic on that at that end too. So there's a lot of logistic or internal structures that they may need to revamp to make that happen. But if it's something that is more valuable than them reading a document, great. I've also had a funder say, you know, I can't meet with you 4 times a year. We have to do it once because they have a huge portfolio of grantees. So I understand both aspects.
Awesome. Thank you all. So we've had a couple of questions come in specific to federal funding cuts. So I'm going to ask all of you to take your specific organization or entity hat off and speak more generally. Because I think some of the questions are is there talk within the funding community around how you might work with organizations different? Are you holding on to hope that the courts are going to come through and that some of the decisions that have been made will be reversed? Just can you tell us a little bit, just amongst funders and colleagues, what are those conversations looking like? And again, I'm going to ask you to speak generally, not specific to your organization.
Yeah, so I think that, again, just with the Kelly hat on, I think that, you know, there's a lot of like organizing and philanthropy that still needs to happen. And I think it started, and I think a lot of these conversations have pushed conversations around like, how do we collaboratively interact with other funding entities in the same spaces? But I think there's still like, this is a moment for philanthropy also to continue to step up. And I think, you know, I'm hoping that the courts will come through, hoping that cuts won't happen, you know, things like that. But I also think that there's a lot of conversations that have come up because of this, of being like, wow, there are probably conversations we should have had on some of these things for a lot, like way before now. And I think that that's one thing that, you know, I am hopeful that this can push the philanthropic spaces to be able to grow in, of being more organized. I had a colleague who said that, you know, the movement organizing spaces are so incredible, and there's so much that philanthropy has to learn from them too, of like, how do we continue to organize and like step up and show up in ways that aren't just an emergency response to things. Like, it can't just be like, you know, okay, here we're gonna throw some emergency funding and then hopefully all of your other problems will just go away with that, because that's like this one-time funding thing. And so I'm hoping that, I think that's one thing I think of with, you know, these times, is that there are so many uncertain things happening, and it is like terrifying and frustrating and all of the adjectives. And I am hopeful that these conversations are also helping to push sectors like philanthropy into being more collaborative themselves as funders, and also being able to recognize that, you know, there are some like traditional ways of doing philanthropy or grant making that just may not be as effective for the world that we live in now. And how do we meet these times instead of trying to continue to, you know, try to use a system or a plan that's not going to address all of the problems that we're seeing now. And so that's my hope and my challenge to philanthropy as a whole. Yeah.
So I would say this is just like you know, it's unprecedented, and we all have gone through some stuff for now how many years of weird funding and things going away and being threatened. And the reality is, I think the collaborative organizing, grassroots organizing, I will say we have a strong attorney general here. I hate to say well, I'm in politics now, I've just said it. We have a strong attorney general who is trying to protect Colorado's interests, getting nonprofits in this space to talk to the attorney general, to talk to lawmakers as well. One of the things is at the federal level, we are in so many ways out of control right now, of our own control. Talk to whoever's representing you, both at the commissioner level, city council level, as well as your senators. I mean, you all know this, you're doing this, but really finding a way to have a collective voice in these issues when the world is as crappy feeling as it is, especially in this space, to have these voices in this room. Like, what if Lyft Academy made a statement and sent it to the AG, made a national statement? Like, what are the things that can be done in this space and in the organizing spaces in your own communities to make sure that Colorado has its voice in the national sector as well. I will go back also to the National Council on Nonprofits. They have regular updates on executive order impact on nonprofits or potential impact, and then if things get reversed, they are pretty up to date. So I would recommend following them for the national stage. But I think when things get feeling this crappy, I always go back to the former U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, who talked about our epidemic of loneliness and isolation and the impact that all of this has on our communities. And things like the work you all are doing is a way to bring communities together under topics that are hard, but you can make differences in your community by the way you do that. I know it sounds very like Pollyanna, but like truly it's true that like the hyper local can really influence all the way up to the federal. So in this time of like disconnection, these spaces are places where you can use your own grassroots powers collectively to have a voice at our state level. And I will say Phil Weiser, again, will show up in anything. So if you want him to come to your thing in your community, just call the AG's office. He loves going to rural. So like, just do it. Like, these are things you can have a voice in what you need with people who can make those decisions and help protect Colorado. So.
A lot of these foundations came together during COVID. And I bring that up because it was a crisis moment where we didn't know where funding was going to come from. A lot of things were put on hold. A lot of state funding was also put on hold. A lot of, in-person, the services that you all provided, where the revenue was coming from, a lot of that was being threatened. So during that crisis moment, a lot of foundations came together and partnered. And I'm hoping, right? My hope is that because of the experience that they've had in coming together and what that looks like and how many organizations were saved and how many are still, functioning in today's day, that during what we're seeing now to be another moment in time. Because these moment in times, it's not the first, nor will it be the last, right? Realistically, there are going to be challenges that we're going to continue to see and face. It may look like COVID, I hope not. And it may look like something else that we're facing now in 2025. But the needs are the same, right? The needs are the same. The people are still in need, and we still need to service them. So a lot of foundations came together. And during this time, I'm hoping, and I'm seeing that they are coming together to have these conversations, to see how, as a collective, because if this foundation originally would put out a grant of $3 million and that one of $2 million, but now this one's cutting it in half to 1.5, and this one's cutting it in half. And so then maybe as a collective, how can they provide support to meet the need that you all have? And then I guess this is another encouragement of the importance of diversifying your funding pool, where if a foundation or the state or the local pull back, you're not in chaos because you've prepared for such a moment as this.
Thank you all so much. I want to add to that. As a reminder, one of the breakout sessions this afternoon is understanding local context. So if you want to talk a bit about how do you engage some of your community members, how do you engage elected officials, that's a great place to have that conversation, or to start to have that conversation. If advocacy is something, and a lot of us in the room can't necessarily do advocacy as a nonprofit, right? Unless you're a 501c4. But if you want to talk a little bit about what you can do, what does education look like? Again, put that on your evaluation form and let us know. But I'm going to change gears so we can talk about something super positive. Tell us a little bit, when you think back, each of you, around the programs or organization that you funded that you're most proud of, or an organization that you supported that you're most proud of. Why? Like, what was the secret sauce that they brought to the table that you were like, oh my gosh, this group is doing amazing work and I'm so proud to be supporting it?
I don't want to say most because others may see this and they may feel some type of way because I'm representing NFF, not Mabel Alvarez. But as I stated, I work with the Metro Denver Nonprofit Loan Fund. That's a fund that I manage, and partnering with different, from the beginning stages all the way up until it closes. And within that fund, we have about 20 clients. And when we fund an organization, we look to see if they are mission driven. We look at their financial stability, because your story should be able to also match your financial story. As a CDFI, as a lender, same thing as a grant funder, they look to see that your financial story also matches the story that you're telling regarding the people that you're serving. So within that portfolio of nonprofits in the Metro Denver area, we had one organization, the Colorado Village Collaborative, and the CEO is here. Hi, Jessica. And this organization stood out to me, and stood out to, at the time, this loan closed in 2022. And one of the things that we want to see is how are you serving the community? What is your need in the moment? And what do you already have in place? Like, what have you already been doing? And again, I look at this from a CDFI, a lender perspective. So CVC came to us in 2022 needing a loan because the awesome work that they were doing, right? They're an organization that focuses on providing housing, and they focus on, they have tiny homes. I don't know if you all have heard of tiny homes, but it is an awesome concept. And in one of the lands that they have, so they create a village of tiny homes. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, like a village of tiny homes to be able to support people. So in one of the villages of the tiny homes that they had, at that moment in time, they had tents. So, you know, sometimes they have the tents, sometimes they have the hard wall homes or the tiny homes, and they transition to the tiny homes. So in this property, they found themselves in a place where the land, or the owner of that land, wanted to remove them from that property because they wanted to invest it or dedicate it to something else. So that's something unexpected. That's something where they're trying to figure out, how do we move all of this? And the cost of moving all of those homes somewhere else is not cheap. And yes, you have support, right? They had a large grant from the city and county of Denver. They also had other grants. And these are things that we like to see, that you have other sources of finances that you are depending on, because as a CDFI, the loans that we make, they're not crisis loans. But they are loans to supplement. It's a financial tool to come in between. We're just like, wow, we don't want this organization to not continue, or we don't want these homes to, you know, have to be destroyed, or that program or that aspect not to continue, and they lose one of their villages, because that's the reality of what we were talking about. So with the loan that we provided them under the Metro Denver Loan Fund, 0 interest, we provided them with funding that helped them with the moving costs. So they went from a smaller land to now a larger land with now 50 tiny homes. And recently, in March, we received a report that it's now 50 homes, 50 tiny homes instead of the tents. And also in one of those homes, which is an amazing story, there was a young lady who actually gave birth in one of those homes because not everybody has transportation to a hospital then and there, especially if you're struggling with homelessness. But they were able, because of the amazing staff at CVC and the loan that we were able to support them with, so that they can move and have that then and there, so that this young woman would be able to have a roof over her head. She was able to, unexpectedly, in a sense, because no one's planning to have your home at a tiny home, but if that's better than you being on the street. So that's something that we're proud of, not just on how it serviced the community, which is something extremely important, but the staff that they were able to maintain to have that piece, that village there, a village that's able to still continue. And then the financial story of how they were able to receive the loan, manage it well, receive the funding, the reimbursement back from the city and county of Denver, because many times the way that these reimbursements happen is that you need to spend capital to receive that reimbursement. But if you don't have the capital to spend, how can you get reimbursed? So it's all this cycle, and that's where we step in to help, and then it just continues to move forward.
So I'm gonna, I've worked on, been able to work with so many amazing organizations, especially in Colorado. And for this example, the one that's coming to me, I'm actually gonna go back to my Memphis days, working in a continuum of care. We had an organization that was the only LGBTQ youth center in the entire region. It was a multiple state. And they had not done housing programs before, but LGBTQ youth are at a higher risk of homelessness. And so they had been seeing a lot of youth that were accessing their day center and just their different services. And within the continuum of care, we had some youth rapid rehousing providers, but none that were LGBTQ specific. And so this was this gap. And so we would partner with this organization on our point and time count, and we were in the same. Memphis was it's a big city, but it's a small community. And so everybody knew about the different organizations. But I remember this one in particular, really was able to see that they're okay, this is a need that's in our community. We may not have the resources right now, but we're going to figure it out, and partnered with other organizations to help be able to learn about the navigating the fun COC application and the NOFA, and be able to really start building up some rapid rehousing programs specifically for LGBTQ youth through their organization. And it was really amazing to be able to watch them not only partnering with other organizations that they'd already worked with and just the services side and all the amazing work that they were doing in general, but then be able to see them fill a need and step into a housing space that wasn't necessarily their forte or wasn't what they had been designed to do, but they were able to grow into this. And now they're one of the leaders in youth homelessness and LGBTQ youth homelessness in the Memphis area. One of their old executive directors used to, actually I think she moved over to the continuum of care to help be a youth specific representative within some of that work. And they're ones I think about a lot of just I think sometimes there's a lot of organizations that are okay, we see this need and we want to step up and we want to do this, and it's amazing. And also every organization is also able to, with everything else going on, to step into new spaces and be able to expand programs and that kind of stuff. But that was one that really stuck out to me as one that, again, saw a need for their specific community, and learned how to partner with other organizations that were already doing a lot of the housing work and already had rapid rehousing programs for youth specifically, and then be able to take those programs and tweak them a bit to be able to fit their clients and their youth more effectively. And it was just, it was an awesome opportunity to see again, how there are needs in the community that, organizations and the community sees that these are gaps that are happening, and the power of being able to collaborate and come together and not just be we're going to try a housing program for the first time and we have no experience and hopefully we'll figure it out. Being able to also be here are the other people that we're already working with that have had some proven successes and have some models that we can adapt and use and work with and have those supports together, and also create something new for the community to help fill those gaps that exist.
I'll go quickly, and again, it's going to be youth focused. I remember this site visit because I had just earlier that day been lost in somebody's field in Nukla. If any of you had been to West End Montrose, that was fun because you don't have cell service, and I had not printed out any sort of map. So I ended up somewhere, and I ended up having to go to Dolores to Dove Creek Rocks that day, which is a youth program in Dolores County, and it was really just like a fun site visit. And then more recently, worked with Yabo Media, which is a group based out of Denver, but they actually just started a program in Antonito where they have young people tell stories on a theme, and it's part of a podcast, and they really get it's kind of what I call like sneaky mental health, where young people are telling their story in the way they want to tell their story, and it can be really freeing and can show you're not the only one experiencing this. So Yabo Media and Dove Creek rocks, but there's again, I'm such like a Colorado, like, yeah, guys, because there's so many cool organizations out there, and I feel really lucky to have been around the state to see the cool work here. So, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to ask each of you kind of just final words of advice or words of wisdom that you want to share with the folks in the room. Before we get there, I just want to acknowledge, I know that we haven't gotten to every single question that's been submitted. I think it's helpful. We'll keep that in mind for upcoming kind of discussions with funders and so forth. I did see that there were several questions around Medicaid specifically. So I think what we can do is look at having healthcare policy and financing, our state Medicaid agency, come and give us an update at some point around what's really happening, what do they know, what do they not know. So I think we can, we'll keep that in mind for sure. But yes, so tell us in your, in the last few minutes, what are your like words of wisdom that you would want to share with everyone in this room?
I would say that we are all feeling the changes of the times, for lack of better words. It's not just like it's at all levels, right? Even from the foundation level to the lenders to the nonprofits to the clients, we're all feeling it. Just feels different at every stage, and we're feeling it. We're seeing it. Foundations are actively having conversations. We're getting emails as to how we can sit down with them, because as NFF, we're a strategic partner to them, and we inform them of the things that we're seeing. So it is very important that you share your story. It is very important that you share your needs and what you're feeling and how it's affecting you, how it's affecting your clients, because these are things that need to be brought up to the table. And that can be as simple as writing an email to your to one of your funders and expressing those, whether it's state. We're also, as NFF, we partner a lot with the state. We partner a lot with the city funding, and we work alongside them. And we're having active conversation as to, we received an email of, what do you think the next stage of funding should look like? What are the needs that they're having now? So these are questions that we're getting. These are questions that they're wondering. They're trying to find what the fix is, even though we don't know what may look like. I know I said 3 o'clock before, but we don't know what's gonna look like in 2 minutes. So tell your story, because we're all in this together. We just sit in different places. So please, it is very important that you continue to share your story and stay positive and know that this too shall pass. Like COVID passed, we're here. So
I agree with everything that Mabel just said, and I think I'll just add that don't be afraid to reach out to funders and ask for what you need, ask for what funding opportunities that they have, what are their responses to things that are happening. I think it is like more than okay to help kind of navigate the power imbalance that comes with philanthropy and funders, of like there's accountability that's needed across a sector. And I think being able to, ask and at least be able to understand, like, to Mabel's point, like there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of, feelings that are happening at all different levels. And I think, understanding where funders are at too and their why behind like their different funding mechanisms and things like that is really important. And also like if you, especially if you currently have like a grant with a funder, like don't be afraid to tell them what you're experiencing and also ask for what you need. Not every, funder, depending on many other factors may be like, okay, sure, we can fund all of the things that you're asking for. But I think having more and more documentation, especially to help push leaders in philanthropic spaces, is really helpful to be like, it's not just one or two grantees that are experiencing fear and loss of funding and things like that. It's all of these different grantees that have reached out. And I think that's one that, it's, again, there's the power imbalance and want to be very sensitive to that. But I think especially if you have those relationships with your funders, with the program managers, I know our program managers are really awesome. And like any of them would be like, yeah, let's talk about this. Like, what are you seeing? And I think just want to encourage that, like, it's okay to ask for those things and like, don't be afraid to ask for it too.
I mean, yes, all the things for both. I think I would just say every day you wake up and you see the news and your funding is threatened, and therefore the work you do is threatened every day. And every day you have to wake up and like be there for everyone in your organization, all of your clients. And if you are not taking some level of care of yourself, you're not going to be in this fight much longer. And so my record scratch, and that's it. Okay. But I think it's like giving yourself grace, giving your clients grace, and also being as honest as you feel you can with funders about what's actually happening. People are losing staff. They can't pay staff. Staff are getting paid on reimbursement grants 3 weeks later and have their own livelihoods taken. So how can you we tend to martyr ourselves to our work. And how do we make sure that we're not martyring ourselves out of our own mental health? And so these organizations and the work you're doing can continue at the high rate that you're doing it right now.
I want to thank you all so much for being here, for having, I think, a very real conversation. I think it was phenomenal. And can you all join me in giving them a round of applause? This is a great conversation. And again, it's the ongoing conversation that we plan to have throughout the LIFT Academy, right? A big portion of our work is how do you continue to run your programs and manage and operate your programs after September 2026 when the ARPA dollars go away. So we will be continuing to talk about funding, sustainability, hear directly from funders, and continue to kind of push you to think differently about your funding sources, how you tell your story, diversification, and so forth.